Welcome to the Grappling Grappling Rewind Podcast.
Welcome to this week on the Grappling Rewind Podcast. In this week's show, we are going to recap the UFC Fight Pass Invitational 3 that was headlined by a rematch between Gordon Ryan and Nick Rodriguez. As always in the show, I'm your host, Maine, to my co-host,
Miranda.
How you doing, Miranda?
Pretty good. How are you?
You're doing better than I am. I am very, very sick, very positive right now. So we're doing the show remote. If the show takes an audio quality hit, that is why. I'll talk about more about that in a minute. So yeah, we're doing it remote. It's been a big week for both of us.
Yeah.
And we are here going to talk about the UFC Fight Pass Invitational 3. Big change of match from last week. Gordon Ryan versus Vinny Magalhães was supposed to be the main event for that, and that turned into Gordon Ryan versus Nick Rodriguez. Nick Rodriguez was pulled out of the absolute bracket as he was the number one seed for that. We had a rematch with him and Nicky Rod, and I think that's gonna be the kind of the talking point main piece for the show. But before we get into that, we do have some news. Do you want to start with the good news or the bad news first?
Why don't we just go bad news? Because this weekend has kind of been
start the show in a bummer.
all around.
Orlando Sanchez, former ADCC absolute champion, has passed away. We don't have a ton of details on what's going on. It's not really the focus of our show, but Orlando is a guy that, was very polarized in the community, but I think if you'd ever interacted with him in person, he was a joy to interact with in person, very jovial, and he was one of the first guys that I actually ever interviewed at ADCC 2019. And getting credentialed to do that event as a backstage interviewer was a big deal for us at the time. And it's still a big deal to be able to cover ADCC in the capacity that we do. But that was one of the not first major. We'd done a bunch of events, but that was the first ADCC that we had covered live and in person. And basically coming up to athletes and, with where we were 3+ years ago, a very different space. We hadn't been around nearly as long. We hadn't done nearly as much media coverage as we had done. Walking up to these, former world champions, athletes, trials winners, invitees in ADCC and asking them, hey, will you do an interview with us about getting into ADCC and, your experience and what we talked about. Orlando was one of the first guys that I actually approached to do that. And he was like, yeah, of course. Gave me a, really brief but great interview. And I'll probably post the interview back up again on the Grappling Rewind social media channels. So it sucks to lose a guy like that in the community. And so he is kind of has always had a spot in my heart for that, just how we were not that well known at the time in ADCC 2019. And he was very willing and happy to give this smaller independent media outlet an interview, and it gave us a really pleasant interview. And it was so it's really unfortunate to lose a guy like that that's willing to was willing to do that at the time. And so that's one of my few interactions I had with Orlando Sanchez. I think I do have maybe a backstage interview that never got posted, but I might have just had a conversation with Orlando after the Nick Rodriguez match. And I need to pull and see if I can find the footage, but it was basically him talking about in the ADCC match, like his momentum, and Nick Rodriguez basically, the guy got ahead of me and he got the momentum of the match, and I could never take the momentum back. And Orlando Sanchez talking about momentum, and it's a thing, but he was one of the first athletes that I ever interviewed in jiu-jitsu that was at that level that talked about momentum being such an important piece of the match. And it's a thing that athletes have brought up time and time and time again since then, but it was one of the first interviews I remember doing that an athlete or conversations I had with a high-level athlete where I can remember them specifically talking about, oh yeah, I could never get the momentum of the match back. And Orlando was, very, very frank with, in that loss. Like, I don't think he was ever really salty about that loss. He's like, yeah, the guy, came out there. Big J. Reglabudo, who was Nicky Rodriguez's coach at the time, talked about bumping into Orlando Sanchez after and how he was always very complimentary of Nick, and the things that Nick Rodriguez had gone on to do after beating Orlando. And Orlando was always like, yeah, man, that guy was really good at the time. He kind of caught me off guard. And so, Orlando, again, a very polarizing figure in the jiu-jitsu community, but definitely someone that I think will be very missed for a lot of the energy and definitely the headlines that he brought. So I just wanted to kind of share that at the beginning of the show. It is a bummer and a downer. to lose, again, essentially two big jiu-jitsu names, world championship level athletes, Orlando and Leandro Lo, in the same year. But these things do happen in the sport, and best wishes to Orlando, his children, his family, and all of the other folks that are, connected to Orlando Sanchez. It's really unfortunate when someone, passes away as young as Orlando was. So, Miranda, any kind of thoughts on Orlando?
No, I never met him at any events. So I don't have any personal stories, but all the stories I've heard was that he was a good member of the jiu-jitsu community and a fun rolling partner. And, I didn't hear a lot of really bad things outright about him training. So that's always a good thing. But it's a sad day to lose anybody who, is so influential in the community.
Yeah. So that does it for the downer section of the podcast. Moving on to the more happy section of the podcast, some new black belts.
This could be a downer if you are also a black belt and you just realize that these people are now in your division.
Bro.
So this could be a downer for some people.
Andrew Tackett, now a black belt. And Jacob Couch. I think we talked about Jacob Couch last week getting it at Nogi Worlds. That dude's fun. Both of them have been competing at the black belt level for a couple of years now and showing up and looking good. But now they're black belts officially in rank, and I cannot wait to see what Andrew does in the black belt ranks here. So
yeah, it'll be fun to see both of them and what they have the ability to do, because we already know that they can compete at that level, and for them to be able to now compete, so the IBJJF rule, they changed the rule that said if you were a colored belt, you could get promoted after winning worlds and go up a rank, and the time commitment didn't matter.
So that's both those guys won.
Yeah. So, but I thought it didn't apply to black belts, but I don't know.
So yeah, that just has some weird rules. So because Andrew and Jacob both won Nogi Worlds, my understanding is that they can get promoted to black belt and then immediately begin competing as black belts in the IBJJF because they are the winners of those world events. That's why Ty could do Worlds his first year and Cade could not, because Ty had beat his brother and won Worlds, but Cade did not have the time requirement or something like that. That's what they said on commentary at the time. But both Andrew Tackett, Jacob Couch, gonna see him in black belt brackets now, even though we'd already seen them in Nogi in those brackets for a couple of years now. If you want to see a dope match, go back and watch their ADCC Open match between those two in the absolute semifinals that Tackett would go on to win and then face Kevin Crane in the finals. Like, that collection of matches for the Open, we didn't really cover it because we had the ADCC World Championships that were happening that same weekend, but that absolute bracket for the Open was wild. And I missed a bunch of it live because I was judging some of the matches, and then watching them back, that whole bracket was just wow. The women's bracket and the men's bracket, I was on the men's bracket side, so I got to see and judge some of those matches, but the women's bracket was also awesome. But those guys meet in the semifinals of that, and it is a crazy match. So both black belts will
be on Flow.
Yeah, it should be on Flow.
It should be on Flow because all those matches are on Flow.
Yep. So I think that does it for news. Miranda, you had one other section of news. So full disclosure here. I am super kind of foggy today. This is, in 5 years, the only show we've considered canceling because I am so unwell. So again, if I muck up some things here and there, apologies. That is why.
And I have one leg, so we're a great.
So you're fucked up too. Today. So yeah, just full disclosure. Again, apologies if the audio takes a hit and if there's some fuzziness here and there. Really not doing hot.
Yeah, the only other thing that I had was that IBJJF said that they're going to have a GP on March 3rd in Austin.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't, they just say there's going to be super fights and men and women brackets, but they didn't say much more than that. I know that Polaris was who announced they were doing a women's
Polaris announced
bracket.
A women's 66 kilogram GP, and I am amped for it because on the poster for it, we had Fionn Davies. And any bracket that Fion's in, I am amped and I am ready to see her in that. There's some great UK talent, great female UK talent. So I know Polaris always does a great job of bringing in UK, Brazil, and the US into those sort of events. So amped for that. Look forward to that soon. I don't have a date for that actually, but they announced it, which is the first step. But yeah, that's awesome news, and it's awesome to see more women's GPs coming up now. And like, I appreciate, those athletes being showcased at the greater frequency they have been recently.
Yeah, and it's nice to have them in different areas too, because like Polaris is a good event to pull out the Europeans, like you said, and because a lot of that European talent isn't going to make its way over here. They said, or at least at this point, they said March. That's all it says. It says March 2023. Oh, March 11th, 2023.
March 11th, 2023. So look for it. So should be a fun GP. A couple months we have, but that should be good. So I think that's it for news this week. Look out. We are going to try to do the Grappling Rewind Awards this year. We do it every year. So if you got stuff like Match of the Year, Submission of the Year, Breakout of the Year, any sort of big highlight moments from the year, DM us on Grappling Rewind for basically, oh yeah, you guys should include this match, or any sort of look back at the years, the top 10 shows we've done for end of the year. Top 10 in no particular order, basically highlight some of the best moments. Biggest upset of the year is always a really fun one. I have a couple of candidates on my list already for that one. It'll be a fun year. So look for that show in the next couple of weeks. Again, I'm very fuzzy right now, so I don't have an exact timeline for that, but we are moving into the holiday season here in the US, so things tend to slow down as far as what we are covering. And so that is a show that is always fun to do nominations for and kind of talk about, and then do actually like talking about them. So I think that's it, Miranda. You want to move right into the recap?
Sure, we can do that.
Awesome. Let's move to the recap. Let's start with the main event here. So very fun card. We'll talk through all the matches on the card because, damn, the UFC, they know how to run events. This event was extremely well produced. It was like, what, 2.5 hours?
Yeah, it was short.
Yeah, I always...
I at least I felt like it was a short event.
I love, and I talk about this, I think, frequently on the podcast, I think 2.5 hours for a grappling event is the sweet spot. I think anything longer, it can be kind of hard to keep interest and keep activity and momentum. I'm not a huge issue with shorter. It just tends to, that was a really short event for your live audience. But I love 2.5 hours because I can sit down with a group or myself, sit for 2.5, watch the prelims to the main card to the finals, and then go about my day and enjoy the matches I've watched and not feel like I'm being held captive by wanting to watch jiu-jitsu. So, awesome pacing. I love the production quality here. Gordon Ryan versus Nicky Rod. So I think the narrative going into this match, we didn't get a chance to preview it on the show because it was a late replacement. Vinny Magalhães is in the hospital with some kidney issues due to weight cut problems, I think. And
yeah, that's what his Instagram was, him basically being like, oh, this is what happens when you don't weight cut or something like that.
So hope that he's healthy as well. Talking about, some downer news. I hope that Vinny is, not gets out of the hospital and is fine. I would love to see the rematch with Gordon Ryan and when Vinny is healthy. So Nick Rodriguez took this on 2 days notice? Something like that? I think it was either Tuesday or Wednesday for the event being on Thursday that we all found out about it.
Yeah, I think it was maybe a day because it was like the same day's weigh-ins, wasn't it? Or at least it was announced the same day's weigh-ins. Yeah. I don't know when he was told, but at least it was announced like right before weigh-ins happened.
They did a really funny like talking head thing with Nicky Rod, and it put it on Instagram, and it was basically like, yeah, you get the call, you take the match. And I just appreciated his attitude. If you don't know, these guys met in ADCC in the plus 99 kilogram division in the finals. They are former training partners. There's a lot of history there. It's pretty apparent that Nick Rodriguez is not the biggest Gordon Ryan fan. In some interviews he gave, especially very shortly after the DDS breakup, he gave some interviews where, it was very obvious that him and Gordon weren't getting along very well in those interviews. So in the first match at ADCC, it was a very quick heel hook win from Gordon Ryan. Gordon Ryan notably had a long sleeve rash guard in that match. He had short sleeve rash guards for pretty much every other match in ADCC. This match, Gordon Ryan comes in. It's a 20-minute match with overtime at the end. Gordon Ryan comes in a short sleeve rash guard. And I was kind of curious because that first match was only 3 months ago, but we've seen a ton more actual like jiu-jitsu from Nicky Rod in the last few months. His run through at EBI in the absolutes, and he talks about it on the Simple Man podcast, which is his podcast with Damian Anderson and Ethan Krellenstein, that he's doing more jiu-jitsu now. And he actually is learning how to jiu-jitsu as opposed to being a wrestler that has a snap down and a rear naked choke and a knee cut. And so I was kind of curious, would we see the exact same match we'd seen in such a short time? Or was Nick Rodriguez going to show us some more? And I think he played this match about as well as anyone has played a match versus Gordon Ryan. It kind of reminded me of almost Buchech's strategy at ADCC 2019. It's like he engaged enough into Gordon's guard, but he forced Gordon to kind of bring him into a range, and then he kept Gordon honest with the body lock attempts. And he would consistently, when Gordon would try to go and scoop and butterfly and sweep him over, or get an arm lock, or get a violin arm lock, or get something going, Rodriguez would lock down the body lock and start sort of making Gordon have to respect that he's pushing his hips together, he's pushing his knees together, and starting to get something going. And Gordon would go, okay, he would pummel his arms out, he would sort of make space again. And for the majority of the match, that's sort of what played out. And I was frankly really surprised.
Nicky also played into his athleticism a lot of times, because he would, and not saying that's a bad thing, it's just when Gordon would try something, he would immediately disengage and then reattack, which was a good, that made sure that it didn't come off as, a stalling, or that he wasn't trying to engage with him, because he was, but at the same time, he wasn't really willing to kind of walk into the game that Gordon was willing to give him.
Yeah, which is, we've seen guys walk into Gordon's game. We've never seen someone walk into Gordon's game really since the Vinny match and do well and not get subbed. It's not a thing that happens. You walk into his game, you play his game with you, he beats you. So Nick Rodriguez, and he's a guy that we've given credit for years now about that's a dude that has a game plan and can stick to a game plan and executes a game plan well. He went into this match having had the first match with Gordon and having had all that time in the training room with a different strategy and played it to a T. He had a pretty tight armbar at one point. Gordon threw up an armbar on him. He was able to yank out. And the defense for this armbar was really, really interesting. He essentially lets the arm go straight while stiff arming with the other arm to pull everything out. And it's a ballsy way to escape, but like you said earlier, he's leveraging the athleticism to get far enough away and to yank out, because Gordon is a bigger dude and probably can't track him at the speed as he yanks away there.
And there also is the whole situation afterwards where Gordon tries to say that Nicky put a bunch of lotion on his skin so that he was unable to hold him.
What I loved is that and then someone on Reddit, props, again, guys hate on Reddit sometimes, but I have a good time. Somebody on Reddit posted a clip from one of the B Team vlogs that was Jay Rodriguez and Nicky Rodriguez, Jay's brother, Nicky Rod's brother, basically putting on they just finished training, they showered, and they're putting on lotion. He said, you got to stay hydrated. And they make a joke about greasing in the B Team vlog. And I was like, that's funny. And again, looking at them,
they've been making jokes about it all week, because they had the pictures of him walking in saying here I come in hydrated, moisturized, and all this shit.
It was good. So I watched the beginning of the match, and I don't see anything notable on
the other
Nicky.
Thing is, if you watch him come in, like they do for MMA fighters, they don't do it for jiu-jitsu as much, but for MMA fighters, they always feel them up as they come in.
I think the word is pat down. Miranda.
Oh, the pat down.
They pat them down. They don't feel them up. They pat the fighters down to make sure that they don't have anything sharp on them. They don't have anything greased on them. They don't have anything on them that they are not supposed to have when entering the cage.
They did that to Nicky.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the match.
And also in the match, you don't see Gordon, like, at least I watched the match live, and then I watched it again before the show to take some notes. I didn't notice Gordon, like, complaining during the match of anything. Did you see anything? Yeah.
No.
So it was interesting. But the other thing is, like, love or hate Gordon, for the most part, the dude is pretty honest, or at least he will tell you what he thinks. I can't really point to a Gordon Ryan interview that he's given where it's like, oh, that's a lie or something. Like, the guy is pretty open with what he thinks. If he thinks Nicky Rod was greased up, then, like, he probably actually thinks that, regardless of it played a difference. Like, in this match, the way that Nicky Rod escaped out of that armbar, greased or not, I think with his positioning, he was probably getting out either way. Like, it didn't seem like something that was like, he barely slipped out. It was like, yeah, Nicky Rod, like, really got ahead of Gordon's hips and, like, got away from him.
And it wasn't like at any point you could see Gordon reaching for him, holding on to him, and, like, losing complete grip.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there wasn't, like, any kind of situation where you were like, oh, he can't hold on to him.
Right.
There was an escape, but the escapes definitely had, like, oomph behind them with if it was a foot or a hand or something pushing away from him.
Yeah, there was technique to it.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was,
and even when they start getting, like, super sweaty, it still didn't come off as, you know,
no, it looked like
two grilled pigs or anything.
Normal absolute guy sweat. So that's the beginning. That's kind of the framework for how the match played out. Very, very impressed with the changes that Nick Rodriguez made going to this match. And then Gordon's like, all right, well, I footlocked you 3 months ago. Let's try it again. Goes for a footlock. And Nick Rodriguez goes, hey, motherfucker, it's footlock time. And he surprises everyone because he grabs a toe hold and, per Gordon Ryan himself, breaks Gordon's foot. And I saw a gross Instagram video that I watched, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 times. I was like, is that the real audio? Because it crunches.
And no, it crunches,
So I've done this sport a long time. And we've been covering the sport a long time as, like, media. And there was, I think, 4 or 5 events in a row where I either saw someone's foot get broken, get dislocated, or get the ankle dislocated in a row at live events we were covering. It was just like, it was crazy. There was a 6 or 8 month, it was just like every event we cover, it's like, yep, toe hold break, it's like, and it kept happening. I was like, this is every single event I'm going to for some reason. And so watching it, it's like that, Gordon, so right after Nicky Rod allegedly breaks his foot, Gordon sits back to his butt, and he escapes it. He's going for a heel hook. He sits back to his butt. And then Gordon has a really good poker face. And we've seen Gordon fuck up shit before, most notably in the Craig Jones EBI overtime in their second meeting. And there's 2 of 3 matches. Match 2 is the EBI match. And Craig, like, cracks Gordon's arm. And in the interview for that, in the post-fight, because Gordon wins that match, and the interviewer asks, hey, did he get your arm? And Gordon goes, we'll know tomorrow. Which is, like, always code for, yeah, it's really injured. Because if it wasn't, you would say, nah, it's fine, you know. So if you say it's injured. So we've seen him, you know, fight through, and it didn't really affect Gordon in that match after. That could have been the 3rd overtime. I don't remember. It's been a couple of years since I've watched that entire match. I've watched the finish since then, but that entire match. And then Gordon continues to play, and it doesn't really seem to hamper him for the rest of the match. We know he's super tough. We've seen him get injured in the João Gabriel Rocha match where he tears his knee and then still wins that match, going for the inverted knee bar on João Gabriel Rocha. In this match, apparently in the toe hold, in the Craig Jones match. So he's no stranger to, like, fighting through injury. It was just interesting because I don't think anyone expected Nicky Rod to counter toe hold Gordon Ryan and to have Gordon like get injured by it. So an interesting fold in kind of the narrative of like, oh, Nicky Rod is figuring out like how to do jujitsu.
And it was interesting that he countered the heel hook with a toe hold as opposed to going after his own heel hook. But my only thought about that is maybe he thought that Gordon has had so many heel hooks put to him that if he grabbed a heel hook, maybe he had a better response to it. And if he grabbed a toe hold, maybe he could get away with it because it's quicker. I don't know.
Like the heel hook, you have to spin out. The toe hold, you can spin down and under. So it's like the direction of attack also spins you out of the heel hook versus the dueling heel hooks. You're both going inside from that position. So like tactically, it was interesting. And it was funny. The Tackett brothers actually put out a video which is like, here's what happened and here's where Gordon's foot was and here's potentially maybe where Gordon's foot should have been to prevent this toe. I thought it was kind of cheeky, but it was also interesting, like interesting technical breakdown from both of those, black belts talking about, here's what happened and here's what you should look for and here's why it happened. I do always appreciate that kind of content, especially right after a match like this, because I always like to hear other people's takes, and those guys are both great competitors, so it was cool to see them break it down. It goes to overtime. Really nothing other than those two kind of sub attempts in the match. There was a couple like back and forth areas. Really, I was just impressed the whole time that Nick Rodriguez changed his game, stuck to a game plan, and then did sort of what Buchecha did, kind of what João Gabriel Rocha did. Like, he looked at the guys that have historically given Gordon Ryan the most trouble and then leveraged his athleticism. And we've talked about how to beat Gordon Ryan a bunch of times on the show. I've written stuff online about it because eventually, like, no one stays undefeated forever. Gordon has losses. He'll have losses at some point in the future. It just depends on, like, is it 2 years? Is it 6 months? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Like, eventually somebody will come along that'll play to it. He'll have an off day. Like, something will happen. And it is very interesting to see Nick Rodriguez sort of essentially get as close as he did in regulation in this one toe hold. I've always kind of written, whenever I've written about this and talked about this, that it would be someone that is a freak athlete. Like, you're not going to beat Gordon unless you have some pretty special athletic attributes. Because say what you want about Gordon, like, he is a pretty good athlete. Like, you don't get to where he is being a technician alone. Like, he's big, he's strong, he's athletic, he moves very, very well. Nick Rodriguez fits a lot of those criteria, all those criteria as well. He's bigger, he's strong, he moves very, very well for a guy of that size. He probably moves better than anyone else at that size in the sport. Like, freak of freak athletes. And if you are going to give Gordon Ryan problems, you got to have some, as McGregor said years ago, you got to have some attributes. McGregor was talking about, that if you're just a regular guy at 45 or 55, even at then, before he was, before he went on his kind of losing streak, that if you were going to beat him, you kind of had to have some special attributes. You have to have something that kind of puts you as an outlier that he's unable to deal with. That freak athleticism that Nick Rodriguez has is definitely one of those criterion outliers that could really, if you have an athlete like that, it can give anyone problems. So I think it's very interesting. They go to overtime. And both these guys show us how good they are in overtime, but Gordon shows us that he never really lost it. Like, that dude is still, I want to say it, the best at EBI overtime of anyone in the world. Like, it was wild to watch the way that he unlocked the body triangles and turned the hips and would consistently just be like, just wouldn't make a mistake in the first 2 rounds. It was like, yep, he goes here, he turns the hand here, he pushes down, he gets the hips to the side, he gets his ass to the side, and then he's out. One thing that I thought was very interesting is that Gordon Ryan would always go a half second before the ref said go. And I don't think it affected the escape at all, or it may have, but I don't think it really would have changed the outcome of the match. But I thought it was an interesting kind of gaming of the rules, because you saw Vic, the referee for the match, when he would say go, he would have both hands on Nick Rodriguez's back, not one hand on Gordon's shoulder, one hand on Nick's shoulder, which is traditionally how you set that position so you ensure that both athletes go at the same time. And I was looking for this when I rewatched it. And full disclosure, I only watched the final overtime here. And I noticed Vic did it in that final overtime. I was like, that's why when you do the restart, you touch both athletes to ensure that one athlete isn't going first when you say go. It was just a little fold that I thought was very good gamesmanship from Gordon, that like you start moving a split second before you say go, especially if the ref has his hands on the other athlete. And that was for defense. I didn't see him do it for offense, but because the referee's hands would have been on him, but for defense, because both guys elected for the back all 3 times, which makes sense in an absolute context with similar sized opponents.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Would you have any other pieces other than the last overtime?
No, because the last overtime was the whole situation with the choke.
Was the controversial one because the rules are confusing a little bit. So let's talk about it. Last overtime happens, and Gordon already has ride time. And if you do the math, you're kind of figuring out, like, it was close. And then you're like, okay, I think regardless going into this last overtime, because Nick Rodriguez got to go on offense last for the bottom of the 3rd overtime. I think Nick Rodriguez has to submit him here. Even 2 minutes of ride time in overtime doesn't win him this match. And so you were like, okay, so Gordon's kind of hanging out, and he's like, Gordon's tired at this point. He's obviously tired. Nick Rodriguez is very tired as well, but you can see that Gordon's going, I don't want to make a bunch of risks to get out here. I'm just going to play it safe. I'm happy to have him hold me for 2 minutes, just defend my neck, and take a win here because that's how you play the game. And in the last 8 seconds of the match, I wish they had a better camera angle here. They went to the top-down camera, which I like.
Well, I think they also, I mean, this is a sequence that happened like twice in a row. Because I believe he tried to rear naked choke him across his face first.
Yeah, he did. And
Gordon
then
got out.
Gordon, and that was probably at like the 138 mark of the match, or like towards the end. They switch the camera because the referee stands in front of the camera they have, so they go to the overhead camera, which I do like the overhead camera. For this, I would have loved to have a face camera because I can't see the hand switch that happened here. But Nick Rodriguez switches his hands through, and we've talked about it in his last EBI, how just amazing he is at making that hand switch. And he gets the choke in, and it's deep. And it's in, and you can tell it's in, because Gordon looks at the clock, he goes, I got 8 seconds left, I'll ride this out, it's over my face, it sucks, but I'm not going to tap in 8 seconds. And he kind of holds his hands up, he kind of waits, and then he hears the timekeeper, and I listened to this a couple of times, you can specifically hear the timekeeper say, time. Which is the same voice we've been hearing the whole time, not just the audience. You also hear the audience say time. You also hear the commentator say time, and everyone says time. You hear all that happen. You see Gordon Ryan look. You see him point at the clock because and this is the thing that happens in combat sports pretty frequently. The display timer on the broadcast is not the official time. And it can be off by 10 plus seconds, which is why for most combat sports events, when they get to 10 seconds, you hear the clapper in the ring, and that fades out. So that your audience isn't going, well, the time's expired, because that is an on-screen display that is not always the official time from the official time source. So, well,
and the other issue is, I want to say that he didn't have to hold, or that the time that Gordon had more time than anyway, he would have won earlier than the full-time amount anyway. So even if Gordon would have survived the entire time, he would have won if he survived less time than the full time.
Right. Yeah. He was 40.
Whole statement, it makes no sense. But
he was 44 seconds ahead at the end because it was fastest escape time. So overall, he was 44 seconds or 45 seconds ahead. So theoretically, a minute and 16 into this round, Gordon wins by 1 second, depending how you look at it. But it goes to full time. And then Gordon points to the time, looks, and basically goes like, okay, I'm getting my face crushed here. The time is over. I understand the rules. I've won. So he taps. And Nick Rodriguez lets go. And Vic comes in. He stops him. And so so there was some controversy online because EBI changed their rules a couple of years ago or a year ago or something like that, that in regulation only, and this is where the kind of misunderstanding is, if you are in a sub, you have to clear the sub before the round ends. So if you end the round in an arm triangle and you're defending an arm triangle and you're not out of the arm triangle, you have to get out of the arm triangle before the round ends. For overtime, that's not the case because that wouldn't make any sense, because if you start in an arm bar and you go 2 minutes, then what's the point of having 2 minutes because you're still out of the arm bar? Like, it doesn't, if you think about it in that context, it makes it easier to understand why this is not a rule in overtime. It's only a rule in regulation. So Gordon tapping in overtime is like, well, it's the time is over, and he confirmed with the time period pointed, and basically the referee had like 3 more seconds, so the time's over. Timekeeper says it's over, and then Gordon waits like 3 more seconds, realizes if the ref isn't moving, and goes, okay, he's crushing my face, I'm gonna tap because I understand what's going on. And then the referee comes. Referee should have been closer here. Referee should have been at the timekeeper, especially because there's a sub in play. He was in front next to the edge of the mat, which is where you should be in that case. He was facing the sub and facing the faces of the athletes, which is where you should be in that case. But when time's expiring, you should be on the athletes ready to stop them. So it was just, this whole controversy came because the referee basically took 3 extra seconds to stop a face crank when time had expired, and Gordon went, well, I'm not going to let him keep cranking my face. So it's just unfortunate that it causes all of this confusion because there was a delay for the referee stopping the match when time had expired when there was a sub in. So it's unfortunate, but that's the explanation of the rules for how that situation should have worked out. And overall, we learned that Nick Rodriguez is still like he was in 2018, and every 6 months since then, rapidly developing his game and rapidly improving, and good luck to everyone else, man. That dude is going to be, that dude continues to be a monster in every event he does, and I kind of want to see these guys go at it again in like 6 months. Like, this is now the guy, like, I want to see Gordon versus Kainan Duarte. I want to see Gordon versus Yuri at ADCC. And I want to see Nick Rodriguez take another crack at Gordon Ryan, because this dude's a freak. And no one has put this much, in regulation, in an open, no gifted position scenario, he broke Gordon's foot. No one's done that since Jean-Gabriel Rocha made him blow his own knee out. Like, it doesn't happen. It speaks to just the level and the speed in which Nick Rodriguez is making rapid improvements, and it's got me very excited for the new crop of athletes coming to take on and challenge Gordon Ryan. Miranda, do you have any takeaways?
That's about it. I agree that it's interesting to see Nicky. I think Dan is the other one. Big Dan. I don't know his last name, or can I pronounce it correctly?
Well, we're going to have to here in a second.
Yeah, we're going to have to in a second. I think he is the other one that is going to be problematic for that weight class once he gets another, some time under his belt.
Yeah, he's trained for more than a couple of years. Yeah, him and Luke Griffith, that whole New Wave team has a bunch of big-ass dudes that are going to be problems for a lot of guys.
Yeah,
so let's move.
I agree.
Talking to big guys, do you want to start with the tournament? You want to start with the super fights? Do you want to start with...
Let's do the super fights, and then we'll do the tournament.
Awesome. So you talk about him. Big Dan Mansouri took on Ricardo Evangelista and finished him with like a mounted neck crank in 56 seconds.
I think it was the smother.
Nah,
I think it was that smother.
It might have been, but I watched it a bunch of times because I couldn't figure out what it was either. Big Dan. Yeah. So let's the whole match happened. Very funny thing at the
56 seconds.
At the beginning of the match, we had Ricardo Evangelista do a foot sweep to Big Dan, and you saw Big Dan almost kind of get knocked over by it, and then immediately try his own foot sweep, and it was just an interesting wrinkle in kind of the veteran savvy of Ricardo to know and to watch the stance and to quickly kind of try that. They go to the mat. Big Dan immediately passes, gets mount, and then goes smother choke. But the reason I think it was a neck crank is because as soon as it finishes, Ricardo grabs his neck.
The way just so you know, the way that he says it, as he recaps it on Instagram, he of course explains it as a mounted asphyxiation.
I don't think that's correct, but because asphyxiation, I think, is a specific thing.
Well, that's what Big Dan says.
Okay.
Big Dan says it was a mounted asphyxiation.
That whole team loves to use certain words for certain things in English and other languages. They like to throw a lot of medical terminology around in areas where I'm not sure that it is the correct thing to use.
Asphyxiation is just loss of the inability to breathe.
Well, I think it actually has to do with the amount of oxygen going to the brain. I think technically is what it means. I could be wrong. I'm not a fucking doctor. I'm a different kind of scientist. So, not a body scientist. I think it was a neck crank because if you look at the underhand grip that Dan had under the neck, and then he uses the other hand like he's going to do an Ezekiel, and he does it to push basically Ricardo's head down with his chest into the forearm under the neck, and basically neck cranks his head and neck backwards using your own arm as a lever to push him down with the face. So you see Ricardo immediately kind of grab the back of his neck after the sub happens, and that's why I think he was tapping to the neck crank, not to the face smother, because if it was the face smother, you'd probably fight it for a little longer versus just immediately tap. If it's a neck crank, like a cervical crank, like what I thought it was, you tap this quickly to it. So that's, again, it could be either way. If you think it's a smother, I think, that's what Dan says it is. I just, looking at this finish, I am much more inclined to believe it is a neck crank based on the positioning of Dan's hands and the grip that he decides to use under Ricardo's neck.
Yeah, I mean, all the media reports are smothered, but we can go with neck crank if that makes more sense. I'm also,
again, I said at the beginning of the show, very, very fuzzy. Do not feel very good. So take whatever I say with a big grain of salt and some Dayquil. So that's that match. Again, Big Dan, he looks good. He's Big Dan. Next match, we had Bia Mosqueda taking on Miesha Tate. This was a pretty one-sided beatdown.
Though I think Miesha did a lot better than I expected her to.
I expected Miesha to get subbed with the quickness, and she was able to stave off Bia into overtime. We've seen Bia lose in overtime, and commentary did a great job bringing up the matches that Bia has done before. We're gone to overtime and taken on people that are not as grappling savvy as her and lost in overtime. Miesha's tough, and we know Miesha's tough. We've seen her Ronda Rousey fights. Look at how much she'll let her arm get extended. In her backstage interview for this fight, she talked about I had to hold my babies now. I can't get my arm broken because I got to hold my babies. And I kind of appreciated that she's in a different stage in her life now than she was in those Ronda Rousey fights and the Strikeforce and UFC fights when she's letting her arm just get mangled to try to get out. And it's just been interesting to watch her career, even before Strikeforce. Been watching her for a long, long time. And so it's Bia gets an armbar in overtime. But the regulation was kind of pretty much Bia passing on top, playing mount for what, about 6 minutes, something like that?
For a while. Yeah.
And then kind of Miesha escapes mount, does a great job getting at a mount. And then Bia passes again in the north-south, goes to the arm again, doesn't get the arm. In overtime, she does get the arm, and that was really, for me, that was really the match. There wasn't a lot to take away other than Bia has a very, very controlling game. The most interesting thing here, other than just seeing again how good Bia Mosqueda is the collar ties at the beginning of this match.
Oh, yeah.
Had this not gone to the mat quick, I think there would have been a referee needing to intervene because these were palm strikes to the neck and head for the first 15 seconds that were absolutely not collar ties, but they were open hand strikes.
Yeah,
so
they were They were definitely throwing hands in the beginning.
They were throwing hands, and then it gets to the mat, and it goes back to being jiu-jitsu. But I thought it was very funny. Again, props to Misha, man, for making it as long as she did with Bia.
Yeah, and Bia's going into MMA.
Yeah.
So Bia, in her post-fight, was discussing how this is kind of a good, almost send away before her MMA career.
And I'm amped for it. Like, again, I hate losing people to MMA, but she's gangster, and I'm about it. I could watch her go do it.
The other thing I didn't realize, and I don't think we ever talked about, was that her and her man were both on this card.
Patrick Gaudio.
They were also both at the ADCC championships.
Yes.
Are they the only couple that we had both parties of the couple ever at an ADCC, both competing? I don't think we've had two members of the same relationship
family. I don't actually know. This is a dumb, like, me kind of question that I should know.
Yeah. I because they both did championships this year.
They are the BJJ power couple. Who else?
Yeah, and I don't think there is another one that's that strong.
It's not like a brother-sister combo or something. It's actually like a relationship combo. I don't know. Interesting to bring up. They're both good for them. God, killing it.
I know.
So Bia goes to MMA. I think
Could you imagine the stress in that situation?
It's probably just normal every day. Bia is signed to ONE FC. I think she will probably make her debut in ONE. So I think this is probably the last time. Well, no, wait. But this is a UFC grappling event. I'm not sure how their contracts work, if Bia is still signed or not.
For what? For ONE?
For ONE. Because she had a match. Oh, Bianca had a match, not Bia.
Yeah, you're getting them confused again.
Yep. Always getting them confused. So, yep, out of turn there. Can't wait to see her MMA debut. Again, always hate when people leave for MMA, but I like seeing people get paid to go do the combat sports. So, if that's what she's got to do, I hope she gets paid a bunch of money to do that. That was all the super fights on the card. Again, I love them. There weren't a ton of super fights, so we could watch them all. They were all interesting matchups and stories. Let's move on to the absolute tournament. Let's start with the quarterfinals, 8-man tournament. We had Luke Griffith filling in for Nicky Rod. So where it was going to be Nicky Rod versus Varela, we had Luke Griffith start versus Varela. Let's start with that match. This was an interesting match. Big size discrepancy here. I think Varela, next to Oliver Taza, is the first or second smallest guy in the bracket.
Yeah, I think Taza is the smallest.
Yeah, I think.
But I could be wrong with that because I remember them saying Varela was smaller. But I want to say Taza's smaller than Varela.
So Taza jumps weight a lot. Like Taza will bounce his weight in. I always get Taza's weight class wrong because I think he's gone to like 160 and also done like absolutes on like 190, 200. Like he can bounce his weight around more than any other guy that we cover on a regular basis at those sizes.
And I don't know if he really bounces it around or if he just doesn't care. You know what I mean? Like if he just is willing to take a match at,
no, because I see him weigh in, because they weigh him in and he'll weigh higher, and then I'll see him cut weight to a match and he'll weigh that.
Okay.
So Luke Griffith versus Andy Varela in here. This was a submission win by Luke Griffith in overtime. Really interesting match. We had a lot of like top pressure work from Andy and like trying to get around, and Luke kind of really trying to contain Andy Varela for the majority of the match. Really was sort of the dynamics of how the match played out.
I agree. And it probably was a little bit different for Varela to go against Griffith as opposed to going against Nicky.
Because he'd already been against Nicky Rod in the absolute in the ADCC. So that to go and plan for another big, strong, long, lanky dude with an entirely different skill set that's going to play guard with you versus planning for Nicky Rod, who's going to wrestle with you.
Yeah.
That sucks. Like that, it sucks to have a replacement like that for such a different stylistic matchup, and then have a guy as big as Luke Griffith. But he looked good. I mean, even he loses in overtime here, I was still very impressed with Varela's performance and kind of how much on his toes he kept Griffith. And Griffith was able to just use his size so well, and then the back take at the end was really, really impressive here. Luke Griffiths just kind of being as long as he is, being able to have the dexterity in his legs to get around the back. That was a Taza match. Wrong match here. That's in the next round. So let's talk about, again, fuzzy guys. I apologize.
That's okay. Yeah, we have Griffith getting a rear naked choke into overtime. The first round of overtime.
Really quickly in 25 seconds. Next match, we have Oliver Taza versus Richie Martinez. Oliver Taza does what Oliver Taza does. If you let him get to your legs, he's going to get the heel hook. He's going to go underneath you. He's going to invert, and he's going to just continue to hunt for the heel hook. We've seen Richie Martinez, Boogie, get heel hooked by really good leg lockers before, like Craig Jones. Taza's a guy, if you can't keep him off your legs and you can't dominate him with passing, and he's going to invert and he's going to get to your legs. And that's sort of what happens here. He pulls first, he forces Richie on top, and he just goes to the backside 50-50, eventually snakes the leg through after a couple of minutes and gets the heel hook. It's really, this is a game for Taza, and when you see it work well, it's a really, really tough matchup for a lot of guys. And so that was that match. Any other notes?
No, not for that match.
Next one, we had a match I think a lot of people were really interested in. Mason Fowler versus Pat Shangoli. Pat Shangoli has been ripping through guys, and then he recently had some tough opposition at EBI, and everyone was kind of curious how Fowler was going to do, because everyone kind of, I think, rightfully picked Fowler here. And Fowler showed us that, he did a throw-by pass to Shangoli, he got north-south, and he kept north-south for the entirety of the match, then finishes an armbar, gives Shangoli tons of time to tap, has to track Shangoli because he's giving him time, and then finishes the armbar.
Yeah, and it was a good game plan on Fowler. And you actually see him use a similar game plan for some of the others, though some of the others, there's some different, kind of mechanisms that he goes to in the matches, but you see the same dynamic pass in almost every match.
Yeah, it's definitely something he goes to the well on.
Yeah, and I was impressed by his passing ability, because no one really seemed to give him any problem passing, and he would just be there, and he was just through them in 2 seconds. So I mean, that was great to see, and it was great to see him kind of understand that someone like Shangoli, you can't be around his legs, so north south is like a safe position for him to go to, and then kind of work the arms and try to get one of the arms away from him and kind of go back and forth and keep working and not really stall out in that position, but just kind of cook him until he could get an arm free and really take advantage of that.
Yeah. Again, where Pat's dangerous, and that's where he has made his hay. That's what has gotten him to this stage, is like, hey man, I'm gonna grab your leg and I'm gonna rip as hard and fast as I can, and I'm gonna get you to tap. And Fowler went, cool, I'm not gonna let that happen to me. And so he just again played it beautifully, and you saw Pat kind of really struggle from the bottom he never was able to get anything going, and you'd see him actually put his own foot on his leg, and even though Fowler wasn't trying to go him out, he was just kind of, you could see Shangoli really get stuck in that position by Fowler, who had great top tripod pressure on the chest, and just eventually opened Pat up. I loved the pummeling of the arms that he did, because he's doing it in a way where he's preventing Shangoli from rotating out, while still being able to retain and trap the arm to eventually take it to the Kimura and to the armbar.
You know who a lot of that comes from, right?
Is it Kayotera?
His coach, yeah.
His coach Kayotera, who's in the corner.
Yeah, he teaches a lot of that shit.
Yeah, Kayotera's very very good coach.
Yeah, a lot of
You're a huge Kayotera fan.
Yeah, I'm a huge Kayotera fan, and I've done a bunch of seminars, and the way he pins arms when he is in either north-south or from side control is something that I do, because as a smaller person, if you can get one of your shins across one of their forearms and you can hold somebody down like that, it makes it much more difficult for them to kind of move around.
Yeah.
And it's a whole leg pummel kind of thing. And it's 100% a Kyotera thing.
And Mason has adapted it to being a large, strong man versus other bigger, stronger people or strong people. So it's cool. I love to see like a small coach have a bigger athlete and have the bigger athlete adapt this smaller game so effectively. It's like really cool.
And their Instagram of them beating the crap out of each other is hilarious.
I think it's adorable. Like it's them always on the beach having a good time in the water, in the sand. You're like, you guys are living your jiu-jitsu best life, and I'm about it. And Fowler's like younger than me, and I'm going, oh, I'm sad now. So yeah, that again, great match from Fowler again. It was cool to see the control that he had on the sub there and just to be able to track Pat through the stand-up, through the roll, through the outside roll, and then just finish the armbar there. So,
the last match, we had one more match.
Yeah. Moving on to Patrick Gaudio versus Haisam Rita. This was a triangle choke. We saw a bunch of triangle chokes here. Patrick Gaudio is he a monster dog, and from the guard, triangle chokes Rita, rolls through on it too. I was really, really impressed with like the way that he controlled Rita. He got Rita so that Rita was on top of his own leg that he would use to stand. And it's a defense we've seen Rita use a lot, is because he's so tall, he can stand up out of stuff, and he gets you at this weird angle as he's standing up where he can kind of yank out, because most people aren't used to being lifted like up at the angle that he lifts you. He can bend at the hips so high because he's so tall, and he can lift you almost like straight out of the triangle and then pass off of it. And we see Gaudio essentially get Rita in the tech up position with the knee underneath him so that he never has that ability to posture up out of the triangle. And it was just wild to see him be able to do that. And then roll through and switch the legs, and just very, very impressive work from Gaudio here.
I agree.
Any other kind of notes on the match?
No, but unfortunately, Gaudio then gets triangled in the next round.
Yeah, let's go on to the next round. Semifinals, we have Mason Fowler versus Patrick Gaudio. You live by the triangle, you die by the triangle. Mason Fowler uses, I forget, they called it meat hook, but it's the rubber guard you do when it's the same side leg and arm reinforcing it. So instead of having like the rubber guard where your one leg is over the top of the back and then your opposite hand connects it like you're doing a triangle almost, it's the same side leg, and he does it a bunch of times. And I think and they talked about, we had Boogie on the card too, and Boogie, Richie Martinez, is one of the best kind of modern rubber guard players in the sport. Really leverages the flexibility in his legs and his knees to be able to play it like this. Fowler, I think, might take that title. Like the way that Fowler uses maybe this specific position, I think he probably does it better than anyone else at the highest levels of the sport. To be able to lock up the triangle like he does here, he fights, basically he gets and forces the arm to be trapped on the same side as that meat hook rubber guard. And then with his other hand, he just has it, because he already has your posture broken down, he has that other hand to fight your hand out to get his leg over to lock like a regular triangle. And he did it twice in this tournament, I think.
I think the second time it's not successful.
Yeah, it's not successful the second time, but he sets it up in the same way, and I was like, he's not going to do it twice.
Yeah, it was in finals.
Yeah.
In finals, set it up again, but in finals, Griffith had the ability to pull out of it.
Yeah, but it was to watch him do this like pretty quickly into the match, and the camera angle was great here to be able to watch Mason's setup. And if you have the flexibility in your hip joint and your knee, like this is a really, really strong setup because it keeps the posture down and you do a lot of the work with your arm as opposed to relying on your knee joint to do it here.
Yeah, it also, the way he did it, at least it didn't look like he was going to possibly blow out his own knee. Because there's always that, if you do this and you don't do it exactly correctly, you wind up screwing yourself.
Yeah.
He never looked like he was in any kind of danger, and if he was, he would let it go and kind of go back to...
You can see him leverage his his hip flexibility, which is traditionally what you're supposed to do with rubber guard, but a lot of guys will leverage their knee flexibility instead. Yeah. But Fowler does a really good job of leveraging the hip flexibility here. And he can put his foot to his head without relying on the flexion of the knee to do that. And just impressive, like wildly neat setup that we don't see at the highest levels versus a guy like Gaudio very frequently.
We don't see in a large gentleman doing that.
Yeah, it's not usually a big guy move. When we see it, that we see successfully hit like this kind of remind me of, speaking of not the same triangle setup at all, but Felipe Andrew and his kind of unique triangle setups, the one he hit on Keenan at Euros a couple years ago, and the one he hit at Hulk on Third Coast Grappling, like just neat guys with specific, really effective, neat triangle setups. It's one of my favorite things on the show is like watching people. They're like, oh yeah, that's how that guy does it. And Mason Fowler has this really effective, reliable triangle setup. I think we've seen him use it other times too, but I got the brain fuzz going on. I can't pick out exactly what other matches we've seen him use it in, but I think we have seen him use this in the past. He underhooks the leg for Gaudio. Gaudio does a good job of trying to roll through, but Fowler is able to switch the legs and just underhook Gaudio's leg to prevent the posture up and gets the triangle. And it's a really, really neat sub. I think one of my favorite subs of the tournament, just because the camera angle was perfect. You could see the exact setup of how Fowler got there and then how he implemented it. Yeah. So that was fun. Other semifinals match, we had Luke Griffith versus Oliver Taza. This is what I was mistaken before. Very fun match. This is honestly a stylistic match that was my favorite, other than the Gordon match, my favorite match of the tournament, because these guys are both new wave. They're both training partners, and you could see that immediately with how they decide to play the match. You see Taza going for the legs, trying to invert under, trying to play his heel hook game we saw to great effect versus Victor Martinez. And you see Luke Griffith repeatedly trying to drop him into a back take. And you could tell it's like, oh, this is a dynamic that plays out in the training room really frequently because you both know with the other what works in the room. It was like you could tell that there was a timing in the way that Luke was trying to throw Taza to the back that is not something you see hit live at two guys at this level. Like, you just don't, you'll never have that timing of a guy like that. And it's a timing where it's like, it's anticipating exactly where you're going to end up and then like hopping through. And then when he didn't get it, it wasn't a big scramble. It was just moving to the next position to kind of try it again. And typically if it doesn't work versus guys you don't train with, there'll be this big scramble. But here you saw both guys were very comfortable with both the counterattack and the attack itself. And it was just a really interesting dynamic to see. I love training partner fights for this reason, because you get to see like that next level meta and depth to a game. And I had a hell of a time like basically watching this play out over and over and over into the match.
I agree. And Griffith finally gets the back take like that you were explaining before. In Varela, you tried to...
Yeah, and I messed it up. It was this match instead. It was just, he eventually just gets it to work, essentially. But he does it in a way where he has to do like a mid-air leg pummel and spin his legs in a way that I thought was like athletic. I'm not sure the best way to put it, but... He makes a movement with his legs in midair and as they are rolling to get to the back and then to get to the body triangle that was really, really impressive. And it's not something you typically see anyone actually able to do. And the fact that Luke can do it here, again, kind of speaks to he knows the matchup, he knows what he needs to do, but also really, really fast movement with the legs from a guy that big. I think Luke's 6? Is he 6'6"?
He's big. He's tall.
Yeah,
I can tell.
I don't know if I think Dan's 6'9", and he's similar height to Dan. I always get their two heights mixed up. I think Dan is 6'9" or 6'8" or something. I think Luke is 6'6" or 6. He's a big dude. To have that dexterity and movement for a guy that big, and I think he's 21. I cannot wait to see what Luke does later. So he finishes Taza with a rear naked choke late into the match with a beautiful transition to the back there. But props to Taza, man, taking on your own teammate, giving up significant size, and then for the majority of the match being on the offensive, looking for the legs. So very impressed with both guys there. Fun matchup. This is one to go back and rewatch. We're going to be seeing a lot more from both these guys. Both these guys are European trials winners, training out of the U.S., out of the same team. So definitely two folks we're going to see a lot more of in the future. Moving on to the final, we had Mason Fowler defeating Luke Griffith via fastest escape time. Goes to overtime. Mason is a monster when it comes to his ability to do overtime. Like, we've seen it before. Yeah. We've seen it in SUG. Dude knows how to do overtime. He is one of the best guys of the sport at it.
And I heard something else that was interesting to think about, and it was that if you look at the bracket, Luke Griffith had two smaller gentlemen, and then he came up against Mason, which was definitely different than the other two gentlemen that he had went against, because he had went against two gentlemen that were a lot smaller in size. And there was some talk over, if that would kind of play any factor into it. I don't know if it had or not.
I'm not sure if it did or not, but it was definitely something interesting to consider leading into that finals match. That it was a different pathway than what Mason had to go through. And I just thought it was an interesting way to bracket it. I do see the logic in not adjusting your bracket with a new entrant. Like, you slotted Luke Griffith in, and you took Nicky Rod out, versus like kind of rebalancing the bracket. And I think that would mess up with the guys' matchups, and it makes it so that everything we talked about doesn't make sense from last week. But
I don't think it really affected that much.
No, I think these are the two guys we're going to see in the finals. I think we could have seen, if Gaudio runs into Fowler, if Gaudio's on the other side of the bracket, I think we see him and Fowler in the finals probably. But that's a matchup I would have loved to see, is Gaudio versus Luke. I think, honestly, all of these guys, this would be an interesting bracket to run back and just kind of reseed it and do it again. I think stylistically, there's a lot of really interesting matchups to be had here. I would love to see it, again, not in the EBI format, just to see it in like an open format, or like a sub only, or a modified points, or potentially a draw decision sub only.
No matter how it's bracketed, I think it's still Mason's to lose.
Oh, absolutely.
I still think he has.
Sorry,
superior ability over everyone else.
What I meant is the style matchups, I think, would be really interesting to see, almost as super fights. Like, I'd like to see a bunch of these guys match up again, not necessarily in like a bracket. I think I kind of misspoke there with what I meant to say. I think Mason takes this regardless of where you put him in, but I was really happy with the way that all of these guys matched up, and I think that these are a bunch of athletes that would match up in really interesting ways if you were to put them into an event again. So overall, it was fun. It was good. And that is all I got a chance to watch this week. Miranda, any kind of closing thoughts on it?
On this tournament, no. It was great. I enjoyed the format, and I enjoyed how they ran everything. I felt like they didn't take a lot of time between matches to like interview people and all that kind of crap. Yeah. So, and I don't think at any point did we get the flow, because it wasn't flow. So we didn't get the stupid screen thing.
No, we didn't get interrupted by advertisements or it cut in. It felt like a professional broadcast. And again, Fight Pass, I think, is doing a better and better job supporting grappling. I mean, think of all the events that they have now. I used to keep Fight Pass mostly for MMA, as we've done this show for more and more years. Now it's much more jiu-jitsu. I mean, I keep Fight Pass for jiu-jitsu. They have Polaris. They have Fury, they have the Fight Pass Invitational, they have EBI, they have Medusa, they have, forgetting something as well, Quintet, they have, what else? We said Polaris. Like, there's a bunch of jiu-jitsu events, and like, it's not uncommon now that I am turning on monthly or every other month Fight Pass to watch a jiu-jitsu event. Also on Fight Pass this weekend was CJJ. It was Team CJJ, so that's a good enough segue. So overall, again, I love what Fight Pass is doing. They bring a great level of production quality to most of their events, aside from some issues we've had in the past with, a lot of times usually it's audio, but the video production quality is great. The pacing is usually pretty good for their events. They tend to run things that you can sit down and watch and enjoy and understand their audiences and respect their audience's attention span and then keep it moving. Kind of like MMA does, and like we've become accustomed to MMA doing it. And so I appreciate that. I wish Flow would watch this and mirror their events like this. Fight Pass is also cheaper. So I pay $150 a year for Flow. Fight Pass is like $98 a year.
Yeah,
I think.
It's not that expensive at all.
Yeah, it's gone down in price, I think.
Yeah.
So it's
because you still have to pay for the pay-per-views.
Yeah, but it's still like it's a service I watch professional grappling on, and it doesn't throw ads in my face during the matches. And their interface is great. And a great thing about it is when I watch an event video, I can click in their viewer to the start of matches. I loved the old like 2014 to 2016 Fight Pass interface where it would have marked submission attempts, round starts. It used to have a bunch of notations in the timeline for viewing it. Unfortunately, they took that away with one of the updates a couple of years ago in Fight Pass. I would love to see them bring that back because it was amazing to watch fights with that. Basically, you could click to specific moments in fights where like a knockdown happened or like a submission attempt happened or like a round started or a round ended or a decision. You could click to all of those. Yeah. But in this one, you could still click to like, okay, I finished a match. I could click immediately to Gordon Nicky Rod, and it would go to immediately start that match. I could click immediately to the start of the semifinals, and it would start the semifinal matches. Like the interface is very, very nice. It's not just a scrollable timeline, and it feels like a modern viewing platform for that thing. And I would love for Flow to give us some of those quality of life upgrades and to stop putting fucking commercials in my premium product that's almost 50% more than Fight Pass. So,
yes, I agree.
Do better. So speaking of Fight Pass, also this weekend was CJJ. Miranda, you got a chance to watch it. I have watched the highlights of people getting slapped in the face, mostly the B team guys, just raining down punches or open hand strikes on people's faces.
So it was Eddie Bravo's Combat Jiu-Jitsu Worlds, and it was Team Duals. It was 4 teams of 5 men that were all 155 pounds and under. And the cash prize was $50,000 for the team. And then there's also a super fight. And it was, if you like watching grown men slap the shit out of each other, it was a fun event to watch with some jiu-jitsu added in. The only kind of drawback to this entire thing was it became a story of if you knew how to use the rules and use the format to your advantage, you could win. If
you can get to overtime and you can do well in overtime, you can win.
Let's go back. The only time you get to overtime is finals. It's finals. It's the last match of the day. Okay. So you went to a draw every single time you went against somebody and you didn't get anything in regulation. It went to a draw and both of you went off the board.
So like Quintet does, essentially.
Yeah, and you went on to the next one. And so the only time that there were like actual overtime was in the finals in the last match. And then each team gets to pick the other team's person to be in the OT.
So I've read somewhere online, basically, apparently in the rules meeting, a team asked, like, can we pick a guy who got TKO'd? And Eddie had to go, no, you can't. Like, apparently it technically wasn't a rule until someone asked the question. And then Eddie had to go, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. You can't do that.
There was definitely a couple times where they had to ask Eddie about something.
Yeah, and that's Eddie, if you go back and watch a lot of the, even EBI, like, I remember this happening, I think, on the show. It's like 2017. EBI, like, it was not infrequent back in the day to, like, they'd stop, they'd go talk to Eddie would go, this is the rule, and they keep going. But like that is what old school super fight events kind of used to run by. It was like something would happen, the ref would look at the promoter would go, this is the rule I made up just now, and the athletes would go, all right, he's paying us, so fuck it, we're going.
Fight to win. I mean, they look.
Yeah, they look to Seth, and Seth goes, this is the rule, and everyone goes, I mean, Seth. But again, I laugh, but I love that I love that we do an unregulated, unsanctioned sport in most places, because you have the guy that's signing the check that's making the rules, and everyone kind of goes, hey man, he's signing the check, these are the rules, and everyone just agrees to play fast and loose with their understanding, or most people agree, with their understanding of what we're supposed to be doing here. And I appreciate that, even in sanctioned events like this, because this is a striking event, so you have to have sanctioning, you can still play fast and loose with the rules.
Do they have sanctioning? They're in Mexico.
Oh, this is one of the Mexico ones.
Yeah, they're in
I think they do. I think they do have sanctioning, but it is Mexico sanctioning, which is basically like, hey man, no one dies. We're calling it a good day.
I don't know. I don't know if there was any sanctioning in place, because they kept on asking. Because it was the same. It was the same ref as the Invitational event, and it was Eddie Bravo kind of saying what happens. But in this event, we had team versus team. So the first semifinals was B team versus team alpha male. And there were 3 draws. But let me tell you, between Ethan Krellenstein and Damian Anderson just freaking unloading on people.
Dude, I cannot wait to watch Damian Anderson's MMA debut coming up soon.
Yeah.
He's a guy that, I will be so sad that he leaves jiu-jitsu, but man, his ground and pound looks terrifying.
And that's open hand. Yeah. That's palm
open
strikes.
Hand.
That's not
where's my money? Open hand. Yeah. And he knocked a guy out, knocked a guy out cold a couple combat jiu-jitsu events ago.
He has a really weird, it's not weird, but he has a very good way to balance his body so that his strikes are coming down with so much power that it's terrifying.
Yeah, he knows how to throw MMA ground and pound. Look, watch Fedor. He does it like Fedor used to do, where he's falling into it, but he's not falling over you. Yeah. And then he can get his hips back under him so he can throw again. This is old school ground and pound. You have a guy that's gonna play guard with you. This is how you do it. And it kind of became a lost art for a couple of years, because guys in MMA figured out, oh, I'm playing guard, I'm losing 99% of the time. So guys stopped playing open guards in MMA. And this kind of brings it back.
Team Alpha Male definitely came back. They were throwing hands too. So it was kind of everybody throwing hands and some jiu-jitsu. You had Damian Anderson get a rear naked choke in his first match and then go to draw in his second match. And you have Dorian Olivares, which is a newer B team member, at least for us.
He's been on some of their in-house stuff, and a lot of the guys speak really, really. Again, you wouldn't be here if they didn't speak really highly of him. I think he's a kid still.
Yeah, I think he's rather young.
Yeah, they speak really highly of him.
Yeah, he gets a north-south choke, and that was the first round for them. That pushes B team through. And then they had a super fight. And then they go back into semifinals again, and that time it's 10th Planet versus Team Combat Jiu-Jitsu Mexico. And that is a little more of, well, at least for that round, it was a lot of Ben Eddy getting smacked in the face, but still being able to pull off some submissions. So we get the first match, we get the Combat Jiu-Jitsu Mexico gentleman getting a heel hook. And then we get Ben Eddy versus him. And Eddy gets a triangle armbar after getting punched in the face. I don't know how many times. Or at least, slapped in the face. I don't know what you consider that. But then he goes into a second match, and they do the same thing. And he gets his Hinduatine, which we have a local guy who does that. So it's the only reason I actually know what that is.
I can't even describe it. It's one of those moves that just watch him do it. He's got a couple of tutorials online about it, and once you see him do it, you're like, okay, that I can't ever do that myself, but it's a really interesting modified gogoplata triangle guillotine variation that he does. It looks like it would blow every joint in my body to do it, but he's made a career out of doing it to guys.
Yeah. One of our local friends, Ellis, does it.
Yeah.
He's done it in super fights before. And in all honesty, unless you know what it is, you have no idea what's happening to you.
Yeah, it's a really
Because it's
complicated
such a
choke to
weird-
unravel.
Yeah. I mean, you can get it. It's not like I wouldn't say it's impossible to get out of. If once you know what's happening, you can not fall into it. But if you have no idea what's going on, it is something that's definitely
and
not.
we've seen a lot of guys that Benetti goes against. Like, just we've seen them get over the years covering him on the show. We've seen them just get like stuck where it's like, oh yeah, he just got there and then didn't know what to do. And Benetti went, cool, I know exactly where you are. I know what to do. And I'm gonna finish you. And it's a choke that is frequently what people run up against. You if you don't have a guy that's ever thrown it on you in the gym, to be able to figure your way out of it in the moment versus a guy who's really, really good at that choke, it's a tough task for anyone.
Yeah. And then his last match, they get the idea that, hey, we're not going into his guard because his guard, he's going to take us out. And they just start raining down punches. And it's a whole match of Benetti just getting hit in the face. And it goes to a draw.
Yeah, versus Kieran.
Yeah, then What? No, that was Fido Rubio.
Yeah, Fido Rubio. Sorry.
Yeah, then there's 2 matches with Mike John of Team 10th Planet guillotining the hell out of people.
Love seeing guillotines.
So, yep, and that puts Team 10th Planet through. They did take more damage, but they had less guys that were. So they came through with like 2 gentlemen that hadn't had any matches.
Fresh people.
Yeah, where.
B team had all their guys. Oh yeah,
they had all their guys.
No, because Damien got
the
finish, so they had one guy that didn't have to go. I forget.
It's the first. It's Fabian Ramirez.
Yeah, Fabian
He's
didn't
the
have
first
to go.
match in the finals. Yeah. So then we had a super fight.
We got
which was
draw.
Yeah, and then we have finals, which is just a draw after a draw after a draw. But it was some interesting matches. It was Ethan Krelestein versus Nathan Orchard was an interesting match.
Which is a match I think we've seen before, but it's been a couple of years. It would have been back when Ethan was a brown belt. He was a brown belt forever, but I forget where this match would have been. I swear that we have seen this before, and I'm blanking on where it was.
And then we also had Kieran Kochik versus Ben Eddy, which was an interesting one. Because it was like 2... kind of guard players, guys that understand leg locks, kind of understand movement, trying to go against each other. But then, so we have all these draws, and then they're forced to pick who is going to be in the final round. And
it's weird. Your other team gets to pick. Like I kind of
like the guys
understand it. I just don't like that rule because you're essentially going to get a finals match that's going to be the 2. What the other team sees is the weakest guy.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make for a super exciting finals match. It's like, yeah, you kind of got your 2 guys that are probably the smallest name, probably the guy the other team thinks is the weakest. I don't like that format for finals. I understand the tactics behind why it's interesting because you really don't want to go to overtime, but you're not trying to go to overtime most of the time anyway. So it's just a weird. I don't like how that ends up playing out because we get Dorian here and Mike John, versus we could have had like Ethan and Nathan Orchard in the finals, which I think would have been a really interesting finals, or like we could have had Damien and Nathan, or Damien and Ben Eddy, like two of the bigger names on those teams. Again, I love that it gives a chance to showcase, Mike John and Dorian Olivares, but I just wish that we could have seen the bigger names headline in the finals here.
That makes sense. And it was definitely interesting to see how that would play out. And I can't really see a way that you would pick somebody other than who you would think would be the most tired or the weakest party.
Yeah, you'd never. Okay. Oh, cool. Mason Fowler's on your team. I'm gonna pick Mason Fowler, or like, the 55-pound blue belt or brown belt or whatever belt that's not a trials winner. Yeah, I'm never gonna pick Mason Fowler. And so I like finals where your strongest member has to get showcased. it's an interesting format. Again, you're penalizing a team for making it end up there, but then you're really only as strong as your weakest member, which I appreciate, but I do think it does take some stakes away from the finals, because then I want to see the strength of a team, not kind of the
well, yeah,
the slots
and
of a team.
then you have a situation like we saw where a lot of these matches were very one-sided to B team, and you have 10th Planet come in and win because they understand how to embrace the rules.
Yeah, and
they understood how to take people out using draws, where they just had a guy basically survive rather than actually, win.
Yeah,
and to do that to remove people from the bracket, and then you have. In the finals, you have them understand the overtime probably better than the B team. At least the gentleman that was in B team did that. So
yeah,
it was an interesting. I thought it was fun, and everybody kind of put 100% in. So if you watch these matches, like there isn't really one where anyone was lazy. I mean, they were constantly trying to beat the crap out of each other and throw hands. So it was definitely a fun card to watch.
I would love it. I would love it to be decisions.
Fights. Okay.
Sorry, you continue. I keep cutting you off. I'm trying. I'm trying not to, but I'm fuzzy.
No, I get it. And I think it makes sense early on, but maybe not in finals. Maybe in finals you need decisions, but early on it makes sense because that way you drop people from. I guess you would be dropping people every time they lost. You would be dropping them. So
there's a couple formats, like we've seen Polaris do it a couple different ways. We've seen Subversive do it a couple different ways. Like there's more team battle formats now around. I just think that the draw. I'm not the biggest fan of the draw because then it essentially makes a match not matter, and it just takes a guy out from a bracket, and it's like. And then the match didn't matter, and then you go to the finals. That's really technically the only match that mattered because everything went to a draw. It's a format that we've struggled. I've kind of struggled to make work a lot of times in our explanations of it, and kind of make every match have weight after the fact. So,
yeah, and then our main event was Uriah Faber versus Elias Anderson. Elias Anderson is the 135 combat jiu-jitsu champion. And he went against Uriah Faber, which, is a pretty well-known 135 jiu-jitsu. No, not jiu-jitsu. I mean, UFC combat athlete.
Only been the champ for a while, like WEC champ. He did a lot of stuff for a long time. Big Uriah Faber fan. Go back, if you want shits and giggles, go back and watch his fight with Crazy Horse and King of the Cage, or any of his UFC title fights and runs in WEC.
I think he may have been held back in this match by his lack of cornrows.
I miss old school cornrows, Uriah.
He had short hair, and I was looking at him, and I was like, "You don't look the same without your cornrows."
Uriah, come on, old time's sake, give me cornrow, give me Uriah cornrows again. I love there was so it used to not a Uriah Faber story. Did you finish the result yet? I'm so sorry. I'm very struggling here.
We'll go real quick. Elias Anderson wins by armbar in overtime, kind of similar to Bia Mesquita. Very similar match. Uriah Faber does show that he still has it. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like he was really experienced with the overtime. At least as I watched him kind of meddle through overtime, it didn't really seem like he may have understood exactly how it all worked, but one way or another he put on a good show, and it was a good main event. And on to your story.
Uriah Faber used to be on Snapchat back in the day. I don't have it anymore, but used to be able to follow like fighters and stuff. I think you probably can still do it, but like back in the day it was like you had to just have someone's username. There was no search, and then Uriah Faber, you could just follow Uriah Faber. And he used to just post on Snapchat. I was like, that's Uriah Faber's day. And that was like, this was back in probably 2011, 2012. I think we're following him, like watching him on Snapchat and seeing once of like, they had moved the weigh-ins to something and he was getting the cornrows done. And he's like, bro, I'm not going to make it. Like, they've moved the day. Like, I'm not going to make this bus because, like, I'm still getting the cornrows put in. That's a picture of him half cornrowed head with that caption of, like, yeah, man, I'm not getting there in time. Like, they're still doing the cornrows. Like, this is going to take a while. And every time I think about him getting cornrows done, I think about like him doing that Snapchat post during him trying to get him somewhere. I'm like, nah, man, this is the time schedule to get those cornrows done because they take a long time to get done. So California kid.
And this was also a rematch. I believe that he was supposed to actually have this match like a year ago.
I think so.
And they had to reschedule it. But yeah, he was supposed to have it back in December 19th of 2021.
Yep.
So, but
I think we previewed this back then.
Yeah, it was a fun match. It's fun to see him go to this format, and I think he wouldn't be bad in this format. I think if he wants to take a couple matches, and get his feet wet into submission grappling, it would be fun. He could bring back the cornrows for us old people, and it would be good times.
Awesome. So that's all I got. Anything on the outro, Miranda?
No.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see how everything goes.
Yeah, because I'm in the same way. We've got through the show. The show was a little longer than I thought it was going to be. I'm fading very fast. I have nothing. I'm gonna deal with this illness, and hopefully, get better sooner. I've essentially canceled all of my family plans now. I'm not gonna see my brothers and all that good stuff. So that sucks. But staying safe at the house. Yeah, it sucks. Shitty timing. I want to feel better. I got the brain fog. Oh, if you have match of the year, submission of the year, upset of the year, breakout performance of the year, DM us at the Grappling Rewind. Even if you just want to talk grappling, DM us. We just talk to everyone. We find everyone. If you're not an asshole,
we're around.
We're around, and so it's one of the things I like doing for the show. You got corrections. Hit us up with corrections. I got nothing else, Miranda. You got nothing else.
Nope,
you guys did commentary for Copa Virginia this weekend. I appreciate you guys taking that mantle. As morning of, I got this, and so
I commentated, competed, and blew a hammy. So we're having a good weekend. Let me tell you.
I got my MRI results back. Finally, I got a bunch of tears in my shoulder. It's great. So, Grappling Run, we're falling apart. As always on the show, I'm your host, Maine, joined by my co-host,
Miranda.
And we are the Grappling Run. You see the mat, whatever it is. Stay safe. If you like the show, please consider sharing it on Facebook with the folks at your gym. It's the best way that we grow the show, and we really appreciate it. You can reach out to us on email.
We also have Instagram. We have Facebook. We have Twitter. We have Google+.
Until that shuts down.
We have a website.
If you have an event you would like to have us cover, please let us know. If you have a name, like most people do, and you'd like to have us stop butchering it,
let us know.
Reach out to us. The show is also available on YouTube, Spotify, in addition to iTunes and every other podcast service. We very much appreciate your time, and thank you.